We have assembled a dream team, some of the country's top experts on environmental and health issues. They're going to share with us some tips on how to live healthier and put less toxins into our bodies. If we are what we eat, we may be in a world of trouble. You won't want to miss this. The Environmental Working Group studied the blood of 10 random Americans. They found 200 toxic chemicals, 30 of which were banned 30 years ago. And all 10 Americans were studied before they were born.
The 10 Americans Project was one that we started about 6 years ago, where we decided we wanted to find out if, in fact, when babies were at their most vulnerable, before they were born and just as they were about to come into the world, were they really being protected in the womb from the toxic chemicals that we know the mother was exposed to? So we conducted a study through the American Red Cross Research Program.
What Ken did, which I thought was really interesting, was look specifically at umbilical cord blood for one of his studies. And his hypothesis, I mean their group's hypothesis was there is probably a lot of toxins in the umbilical cord blood. Makeup that people put on, the air that they're breathing, all kinds of food, and they were right.
What we found was really shocking. An average of 200 toxic chemicals in each of those babies' umbilical cord blood. Obviously, the mother's placenta wasn't filtering out all of those chemicals. A mixture of hundreds of toxic chemicals, carcinogens, toxins that can affect the nervous system, immune system chemicals that can cause problems for later life. A whole range of things. And as more scientific research has focused on these very early exposures, we know that they can raise the risk of diseases like cancer and ADHD and other problems later in life. I think what that tells us is we're not doing a very good job of understanding what it is we're exposing all of us to, but particularly when we're most vulnerable. Many of these chemicals are chemicals from everyday life. Over 30 of them were actually banned from use in commerce 30 years before we did the study, but they still persist in the environment.
Are all chemicals in use today tested on humans, animals?
No. Most of the chemicals, the industrial chemicals that are in commerce today, have not been rigorously tested and do not meet a rigorous safety standard.
The Safe Chemicals Act, which is something that I think is sort of remarkable, that had not been modified, I think, in, I'm going to say since the early 70s. But basically, it was this idea that, look, we want to create a society using government that's going to look at what chemicals are being released. And chemicals that are new, that are going to be released into our environment, they have to be studied and they have to be found to be safe before that can happen. Long story short is, while the act is there, the implementation of it really never occurred. And of the hundreds and hundreds of chemicals that we're surrounded with every single day, only a handful of them have ever really been studied.
Toxins are pretty much everywhere, so let's focus on one area right now, our food.
I think we should worry a lot about pesticides. The bottom line is they can't be good for us. These are poisons that are designed to kill living organisms whose basic biology is not that different from ours. The limits on safe levels of them have been set mostly with the issue of acute toxicity of single agents, and that's not the concern. I think what we should be worried about is chronic low-level exposure to many different things. And I'm sure that we're going to find that diseases like Parkinson's disease and ALS, some of these very bad neurological degenerative diseases, will be traced to environmental toxins, and I think pesticides are high on the list of suspect.
We recommend that people be careful about the fish that they eat, particularly if they eat a lot of tuna. You have to be very careful, particularly if you're pregnant or thinking of getting pregnant. The mercury in that fish can cause an overexposure problem that you don't want to have.
Are these toxins really, is there proof that it's related to cancers and ADHD?
My common sense tells me that if you put a chemical into something and I feed that to my child, that's not good. And processed food, which is so much of what we're eating today, has chemicals in it. Food dye is a chemical. You can buy conventional macaroni and cheese and it has a food coloring in it. That's a chemical.
Artificial colors, I think, are all suspect of causing cancer or doing other things that aren't good to us. And then all these chemicals that are in food, all the things that you wouldn't use at home, are there mostly for the convenience of manufacturers. They're to improve textures, to make things appear better. They're not nutritious, they're not good for us.
And the prevailing view is that for some people who might be disposed to develop cancer, that development doesn't take place until they're exposed to some agent in the environment that triggers it. No one knows for sure which particular chemical might trigger it, at what time in life, but that's where the research is headed right now, to understand how genes and the environment interact. They're not separate.
We can talk about our clothes, we can talk about our dry cleaning, we can talk about our makeup, we can talk about the food we're eating. If you think about the pile-on effect of all these chemicals in our kids growing up, this is the thing, this is why we have to be so concerned about it. I know it gets unbelievably overwhelming for people. It's like, oh, well, this is bad and that's bad, and you gotta live. Yeah, you have to live, but you also have to, be aware of what's going on. And, along with this toxic world we're living in is this unbelievable rise in health problems. It's astonishing. I mean, the United States has the highest cancer rates in the world. Well, why is that? It's not genetic. It's not genetic. Breast cancer, as an example, 10% of all breast cancer cases in the United States are genetic. 10%. So what about the other 90%? That's environment. What's the environment? What we're breathing, what we're eating, what we're putting on ourselves.
So hormone disruptors, children maturing a lot faster, little girls are maturing at a rapid rate. Tell me a little bit about that and what you think causes that.
Well, there's an evil thing out there called BPA, and it's a hormone disruptor. It's a chemical. It's used to line, are you ready for this? Food cans. Okay, ding, 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 mom alert. It's in every, tomato can, anything you buy in a can of food, it's lining that. Soda cans have BPA lining in it. It's also in hard plastic water bottles. I mean, it is invasive. It's all over the place. Guess where else it is? It's on cash register receipts. How many times a day does a sales clerk hand you a cash register receipt, which you take and put in your pocket?
You can drive yourself crazy as a parent trying to shop your way out of all of these exposures. So we get back to the question, where is the government here? Why hasn't the government stepped in?
You talk to politicians in Washington, and they'll say, look, we got about 1,001 things we're working on. And as much as you're passionate about this, and I am, it is not one of those incredibly sexy topics. This is like a slow moving disaster. It's not a hit like a hurricane or a tornado or a tsunami where everyone, all of a sudden, the world is transfixed. This is taking place over decades and decades. So how do you get people to pay attention to something where they may not see the repercussions for a long time to come? It's tough politically.
I don't think we can count on our government to protect us from harmful chemicals in our food. I mean, the sad fact is that when our government is faced with a choice between public health and private gain, it almost invariably sides with private gain unless it's forced to do otherwise. And that just reflects the enormous power that these vested interests have over our legislators and politicians. And I think the only way this changes is if people get educated enough, aroused enough, and start a movement that changes the political balance of power.
So if we shouldn't rely on government, what can we do? Do we have to buy organic?
Well, here's the thing. We have to get simpler. 70 years ago, all food was organic. It wasn't a niche little market, everything was organic. But unfortunately, our food system has become corrupted over the years. And I think it's, a huge burden on moms to try to wade through all this stuff. But here's a simple way to do it. You have to start cooking at home. When you don't cook at home, you don't know what's in your food.
Today, most people are mostly eating food made by other people and often by large industrial food producers. So it's manufactured food that has been technologically manipulated and changed from the way that nature produces it. I have a lot of concern about imported food, especially now when there's such a demand for organic produce and large distributors like Walmart are buying huge quantities of organic food from China. I don't have confidence that organic standards are enforced in China.
If you can, try and shop organic. That will reduce your pesticide exposures dramatically. And there are some fruits and vegetables that we list in our website that, even if they're grown conventionally, turn out to be pretty low in pesticides just because of the way they're grown and the way pesticides are used on them.
I certainly understand the difficulty that people have in buying organic. In many parts of the country, it's not easily available and it's expensive. So I think that it's important for people to learn which crops are most likely to be contaminated with pesticide residues, and in those instances, either to try to minimize consumption of them or get organic versions. And I often refer people to the Environmental Working Group in Washington, D.C.
I think their goal is to say, look, there are certain things that we are recommending you buy organic, and certain things where you don't have to waste your money buying organic. So they want to come up with the foods that have the highest concentration of residues from pesticides and various other things in terms of toxins. And they come up with their dirty dozen list. Apples, interestingly, topped the list this year. And the way they test this is fascinating. They get the fruit, then they power wash it a couple of times, and then they test for the residue. And the importance of that is that it's hard to wash this residue off in your own home. If it doesn't come up with a power washer, it's probably not going to come off with your own washing. And then those foods they say you should buy, organic. With the Clean 15, they say these are foods where you can save your money. You don't need to buy organic here necessarily because the pesticide residues just really are not that high. My wife and I cut the list out last year and posted it on the refrigerator, just a little reminder when we go to the grocery store what to buy. The list does change every year, but it's pretty similar. You may have some switching of spots, but the fruits and vegetables are usually pretty similar.
So what about milk? Is it really good for you?
We have been, I think, really fed a line about the health benefits of cow's milk, which simply does not accord with scientific data. The influence of the dairy industry on schools of nutrition, on the Department of Agriculture's food pyramid is very strong. That it is simply not true that milk is nature's most perfect food. It is for baby cows. And as for milk building strong bones and strong bodies, there's very clear data from the Harvard School of Public Health, from epidemiological evidence, that the populations with the highest dairy intake have the highest rates of hip fractures.
As far as the types of foods that we buy, we do buy organic milk. I've been concerned about growth hormone in the milk being used in cows to have them produce more milk.
I would say one category I'm very concerned about is the use of estrogenic hormones in cows to increase weight gain. The residues of these hormones are in meat and in milk, and I think this is a major factor that increases hormonal pressures driving cancer, and probably both in men and women. I think it's a pressure toward prostate cancer in men and breast cancer in women. We've seen the age of puberty drop in this country, and there may be many reasons for that, but probably a lot of it is increased estrogenic pressures. I think we should stop the use of bovine recombinant growth hormone. We don't need the excess milk that it produces, and that has very harmful effects both on cows and I think in humans. One issue that I don't think many people know about is that dairying practices in this country are not natural. We have gotten in the habit of keeping cows in constant states of pregnancy or lactation. That's not normal. It greatly increases milk production. But when cows are pregnant or lactating, they have high levels of sex hormones going around their body. Those get into the milk. They are strong estrogenic pressures.
Do we eat too much meat?
I don't tell people to avoid meat altogether. What I do tell people is that Americans eat vast excesses of meat, and it's good to cut down consumption of animal products in general, except for fish, especially oily fish that are sources of omega-3 fatty acids. It's good to try to replace some of the animal protein in the diet with vegetable protein, and that would include soy products as well as other legumes. I think that's a healthy change that people could make.
We are eating meat at an unsustainable rate. It's not sustainable for our health, and it's not sustainable for our planet. Okay, so we're eating, if you start to get into the statistics of things, it's shocking. 150 times more chicken than our grandparents ate. Okay, again.
Is that because there's 150 times more
No,
people?
it's because we're eating meat 3 times a day instead of 3 times a week. Look at how other cultures use meat. It's a side dish. It's not the main course. Or you make a beautiful bowl of vegetables with a little bit of meat in it, and it's a flavoring thing, and that's all you really need. And then, of course, this brings us into the issue of antibiotics. I mean, this is a mom issue if ever I heard one, right? So we've all taken our kids to the doctor, and we've been told by the doctor, make sure you use that whole run of antibiotics. You have to go through the whole 7 days, and doctors don't even like to give you antibiotics anymore because we're overusing them, using them too much. Okay, well, guess what? 80% of our antibiotics, 80% of these brilliant medicines that help, save our parents and grandparents and save young kids from staph infections and pneumonia are going to animals. 74% are going to healthy animals. So what's happening is the industrial farms are using the antibiotics in the feed to do what? To make the animals grow bigger, faster, to keep up with the demand. And we're losing the ability to fight infections. This is unacceptable. If my kid gets pneumonia, I want to know that there's going to be an antibiotic to help them get better. That's what I want to know. I want to know that that's going to be available to me. And right now, where we're going, that may not be the case. Unfortunately, the majority of the meat that's sold in supermarkets and that you buy in restaurants is factory farmed.
Okay, what about the meat? I always get it and it says, it says it's not, that there's no hormones. Is
That's
it true?
good. If it says no hormones, if it says no antibiotics, if it says organic, then it's true. But if it says natural, natural means nothing. So that's a way that we get tricked into buying things, because natural seems like it's a good thing, but it doesn't. There's no regulation to the word natural, and anyone really can use it.
So now you're thinking, what else is in our food that we should be worried about?
I think the top 5 ingredients in refined processed manufactured food that I would tell people to look out for and avoid: high fructose corn syrup, refined soybean oil, any partially hydrogenated oils of any kind. I would say also artificial color. Finally, I would just say, if there are too many ingredients there that they can barely fit them on a label, chemical names that you don't understand, or if you think about how you'd make this at home, and if there's too many things there that aren't what you'd use, you don't want to buy that product. High fructose corn syrup and refined soybean oil are markers of cheap foods. They're cheap commodities. Soybean oil in the American diet is the major reason why we're consuming such a vast excess of pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids versus the anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids. High fructose corn syrup is the universal sweetener. It may turn out to be a main driver of obesity, especially in kids, but both of these are markers of low-quality foods that are best avoided. You look at the ingredients on a Twinkies, for instance, it's all artificial. There's nothing there that's real, practically. And most of these things it's stuff that human beings did not eat historically, and it's not whole natural food. So I think this is what's most disturbing about how food patterns have changed. If you go into a convenience store in this country, almost everything you see there is artificial. It's all technologically manipulated food that's full of additives, of these unhealthy ingredients. It's not real.
I think the most important thing, honestly, is just to remember this quote. Just remember this quote: perfect is the enemy of good. But you gotta do the best you can, and then you try to do a little bit more.
You don't have to buy organic food. You don't have to shop in health food stores. If you just begin doing more cooking from scratch, making food from fresh ingredients, and reduce consumption of these industrial food-like products, you are on a very good path to better health.
Research by Dr. Shauna Young made a big difference for this family and their struggle with autism.
There were no peaceful moments with Nick when he was a baby. Developmentally, at probably about 3 months, we were first evaluated. Some friends would say, I don't think this is quite right, I don't think this is quite right. And he was my 6th child, so I knew. At 3, Nick was hospitalized with meningitis and encephalitis. he lost the ability to do everything except breathe. He started having seizures. He went into a coma there and was in a coma for a little over a week.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Shauna stumbled across a very interesting article.
So I went on the internet and I finally asked just the right question, and it popped up a really wonderful Weston Price article called Manganese Madness. And this was a situation that started all the way back in prior to 1900, back in the 1880s, where an English physician had actually found local manganese miners that were having all of these weird symptoms. And they were having hallucinations, they were having trouble speaking, they were having trouble keeping their balance and walking, all of these kinds of things. And when I put all these symptoms together, it just sounded a lot like autism.
Nick was hospitalized with meningitis and encephalitis. Then we started having anger issues, screaming and raging. He came home on a seizure medication because of the seizures associated with the meningitis and encephalitis. At that point, we were looking at a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. He couldn't sit in a chair and eat his lunch. He stood in the chair and walked in circles while he ate his lunch. He climbed the shelves in the closet.
Nick is very far out of what I usually work with. What I work with usually is more the mainstream of autism and autism spectrum disorders. Sometimes the kids are on a medication or two or something like that, but this was so extreme with the 6 medications, with them being antipsychotics. He was very violent at the time, and he was either threatening me or threatening himself pretty much for the whole thing. And when you see that coming out of that angelic little face, it's very scary. But I told his mom, I said, look, I don't know if we can do anything here, but it can't hurt.
We had tried diets before. We had tried a lot of things before. And we were already on a fairly healthy, whole food kind of diet, not a lot of packaged things. We had been gluten-free, casein-free for a long time, and we're used to eating whole foods. So on Monday morning, the foods just changed a little. There were no grains, and so some things were coming out of the house. The neighbors got a lot of free food.
Manganese is not something people think about, and the sources of manganese are the ones that are frightening. Soy, especially baby formulas, vitamins, cereals, especially a lot of children's cereals. They are fortified, it says, fortified with manganese. Why?
Right after Shauna made her discovery, she had a remarkable experience with a young patient.
Iron and manganese take the same receptor sites in your brain. So I thought, well, if his manganese is too high, what if I gave him some iron? I wonder what would happen. The child does not like meat that much. He likes vegetables a lot better. So I ran down a whole bunch of high iron vegetables. So we were getting him to eat raw spinach and black cherries and, just some things like that were high iron. You've been on the diet for 8 days, and I said, is anything different? She says, well, he started talking. And he hadn't spoken since he was 1.5 years old. And he was now approaching 4. And I said, what did he say? And he was eating a spinach salad with both hands, and she said, boy, you're really liking that salad, aren't you? And he says, yeah, I eat it all up.
Armed with these amazing results, Shauna began to work with Nick.
For the first time in 3 years, my husband sat right here on Sunday at lunch, and we had a family meal together. My husband sat here and cried. We had not been able to sit as a family and eat a meal in 3 years because Nick couldn't sit at the table.
The way that the diet falls out is there's a best list and then a moderation list and then a don't eat it. And we point out right up top that the don't eat for now list, that most of those foods return to just fine once you're off the protocol. This is used therapeutically and it's used for a finite period of time.
The diet's pretty easy. It's a lot of food that I grew up eating. It's not a problem for us to eat this way. It does mean you're not going through the drive-through, but shouldn't be anyway, probably. Nick is able to go places with us now. Nick had not been able to go to church, go to school. He can do things like other kids now. We started this protocol 6 months ago. Nick was in devastating circumstances. There was this much hope and just a boatload of bad, and I didn't know what his future would be. Within 3 months, we were off of all medications. We've gone 180 degrees from this much hope and this much devastation to all hope, tons of hope, and a bright future.
Sweet potato.
Sweet potato!